Well, the National Security Analyst Arash Aramesh joins me now live from San Francisco. Good to speak to you again, Arash. Many people are going to be surprised at why there is any kind of terror threat at all in Canada. So why Canada? Why now?
First of all, my heart goes out to the family of Corporal Nathan Cerullo, who was killed today as he was standing guard at the Canadian War Memorial. Why Canada? Why now, Hannah? Canada has been part of this coalition against ISIS. Last week, around Wednesday, Thursday, the chatter on the web, on social media from ISIS and from ISIS-linked sources just went up. They were talking about attacks. They were talking about punishing Canada in particular. And on Friday, the Canadian government raised it elevated its terror alert level. On Monday, we had this incident where an unknown person, most likely linked to the person who carried out the attack today, or probably just himself, he killed a Canadian soldier in a hit-and-run accident and really badly wounded another Canadian soldier. And today, we had this incident where this radicalized convert walks into the Canadian Parliament, opens fire, and kills Corporal Cerullo. So it is an act of punishment against Canada's involvement in the war against ISIS, that's the Islamic State, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and it's sort of being an ally of the United States and also a major player in the West. Let's not forget that Canada is part of the Western world and it's part of the West, and it shares with other Western countries a great deal of Western values.
But do you think this would have been a huge surprise to the Canadian government, for example? We know that it was just on Monday that a very senior Canadian spy gave evidence to a committee of MPs saying that there were some 80, 90 homegrown jihadis in the country that they simply didn't have the resources to monitor.
Right. A very senior Canadian intelligence official, as you just mentioned, gave this testimony before Canada's Parliament, saying that they cannot monitor this 85, 86 suspected terrorists because Canada's intelligence services just don't have the adequate resources they need, which means that we got to work on that. If they don't have the adequate resources they need, but they have a laundry list of individuals that they want to follow, we got to work on that and make sure that both intelligent officials, their units, and also counterterrorism and law enforcement organizations have exactly what they need. So is it a surprise? Yes, it is. Every terrorist act is a surprise, but is it unlikely in the world we live today with all the threats that are going on around us that Canada, like many other Western countries, be attacked in this sort of terrorist attack? No, it's not unlikely. Let me just remind you that not that long ago, about a generation ago, Canada witnessed one of the worst terrorist attacks history has ever seen, and that was the Air India bombing, where a fully loaded 747 exploded after it took off from Vancouver International Airport, and it took about 20 years to bring the two Sikh extremists to justice in Canada.
Is it fair to say, Arash, that whilst all the efforts are focused on the physical threat of Islamic State and the airstrikes that are ongoing there at the moment in Iraq and Syria, there's not enough emphasis that's being placed on the ideology of this extremist Islamist ideology?
And that is exactly the problem. ISIS is just an organization. It may be physically defeated. We can kill, capture, and eventually get rid of most or all of its members and its fighters. But what remains is this vile, radical ideology, this bastardization of Islam, this radical Salafi sort of Wahhabi interpretation of Islam, part of which are sort of the fault of some of our allies. Some of America's allies in the Persian Gulf have been funding some of these radical schools from Pakistan all the way to East and West Africa to bring in young people, to radicalize them. But even more dangerous than that is the radicalization that goes on in some of these mosques in London, in Manchester, in Liverpool, in Toronto, in Detroit, and in Los Angeles. Now, the vast majority of Muslims living in America or other Western countries are very good, peaceful people. I know many of them but there's a very, very small percentage that have been radicalized. And again, we need the community and we need the law enforcement and intelligence officials to work on this and make sure these incidents don't take place again.
Yeah, and given the threat and what we've seen in Canada now, do you think that all Western developed countries are now on a heightened state of terror alert now because of what's happened in Ottawa?
Precisely so. Remember, we had attacks in London. We had attacks, I mean, after 9/11, we've had attacks in London, in Madrid, in Canada. There were shootings in Fort Hood, Texas. There's been a number of attacks. I mean, this is just what comes to mind right now without having done really much of my homework to give you a laundry list of attacks. But it's not just the Western world. It's also the biggest sort of victims, the largest group of victims of radical Islamists are actually Muslims. Everyday Muslims who live in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Saudi Arabia are victims of radical Islamists. But again, in the Western world, what we have to worry about and be concerned is the possibility of homegrown terrorism and the fact that one day someone like this gentleman today who became radicalized doesn't turn radical. A final note, these are not ordinary citizens who become radicalized. If you look at the average profile of a radical convert or a radicalized sort of Islamist, they are the rejects of society. They have a whole host of interactions with police and law enforcement, and they're for the most part rejects from their own communities and society.
Arash Aramesh, great to speak to you. Thank you.